Hello and welcome everyone to today's video. Today, I want to compare two Resin 3D printers. To my left, the Creality Halot Sky CL89. Hope I got that right. To my right, the Shining 3D AccuFab L4K. Now the reason I've chosen these two printers to compare is that they theoretically have very similar tech specs and should deliver fairly similar results. So the Halot Sky has a screen resolution of 3840 by 2400 pixels. That's standard for this type of 4K resin printer. And it has a build volume of 192 width by 120 by 200 millimeters. So 20 centimeters high, 19.2 wide, and 12 deep. The AccuFab L4K, same screen resolution, exact same. Same screen size, and the print volume on this printer is 192 by 120 by 180 millimeters. So 18 centimeters high, 19.2 wide, and 12 deep. So the only difference in build size is that the Halot Sky can go 2 centimeters higher in terms of build volume. Other than that, screen resolution and rest of the print volume in the XY plane, exactly identical. So that's why we're having a look at these two, and we'll start with the externals, and then we will move on to some of the stuff under the hood, and then we will have a look at the software and at the menus of the nice screens that both of these printers have. Okay, so let's start with the externals. The Halot Sky is made almost completely out of metal. All of this outer casing is metal, aside from the hood, obviously, but all of this, everything here is just metal, which is quite nice. It looks really good, and it gives the machine a very solid appearance. The Shining 3D, similar deal. All of this made of metal. However, they have a plastic front that I assume is glued on top of metal because the printer is actually still really heavy. And underneath, you can also see that there's metal. And it goes right up to the edge. So I'm pretty sure it's just a mask that is put on top to make it look nicer. Still, both of these machines have a really rigid and highly valuable feel. You don't ever feel ashamed when walking up to these printers on your workbench, and they just look great. So big A+ for both machines on the outer looks front. However, the Halot Sky only has air vents underneath. And there's not that many, and they don't look sufficient, in my opinion, for the powerful light bulb that is inside in order to illuminate the print volume. On the AccuFab L4K, we have vents on the left and the right side, and we can hear the basically air conditioning going even when not printing. So I haven't stress tested the Halot Sky yet, so I'm unsure how much this ventilation issue may actually come into play, but I'm assuming it may have an impact on the lifespan of the light bulb inside the Halot Sky printer. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that doesn't matter at all, and then this completely closed look, it's nice, but the question is whether it's practical. I don't know yet. Both machines feature a 5-inch touch display. The Halot Sky's one is in portrait mode, which is interesting. Most of these resin printers always have landscape, as the AccuFab L4K does. The AccuFab also has this little LED ring around that shows you the status when it starts printing or when it's done. The LED ring changes to a breathing pattern, or it'll turn green, etc., etc. So that's a little nice. In terms of connectivity, both of these printers have Wi-Fi access. On the AccuFab, you also have a USB plug for a USB stick and an Ethernet port, so you can plug a network cable into the printer. On the Halot Sky, we only have a USB plug for your USB sticks or a USB-A plug for a USB cable. No Ethernet cable here. But as I mentioned, it can also join your Wi-Fi. What else about the outside? So that's the main things you notice. Both of them obviously also have a power switch. So let's open up the hoods, and that in turn is one of the next points I want to touch on, because I love this feature on both printers. I hate the resin printers where you have a cover that you need to lift off straight up, put aside, and they take up more space on your workbench. This right here is a really nice and clean solution for both printers to not take up any additional workspace, but have a nice enclosed build volume when not working. Couple things about that. Immediately, you may notice that the Halot Sky's cover rises up a lot higher. That is in part due to the increased build volume. Remember, it goes 2 centimeters higher, but it is also due to a different hinge mechanism on the Halot Sky. In addition, the Halot Sky uses a sort of finicky system at the back that I wonder how long it may last. I'm expecting the cover will actually break at some point where the hinge is attached because it doesn't seem quite as solid. In addition, there is like rubber down here to make a nice seal when closing the lid, but then there are these screws that actually make a clicking sound after all. I'm pretty sure that's the magnets to hold the cover solidly in place, but it just takes away from this nice and soft feel. On the AccuFab, there's rubber at the top and rubber on the bottom, so you never hear it. It's such a smooth operation. So I tend to give the AccuFab a couple of bonus points here, but I'm just happy that the Halot Sky has this at all, and it still works great. So that's really nice. I like this. Great feature. Next up, we can have a look at the built plates on the Halot Sky. I'll just take this out. There's a little knob at the top, obviously, that you loosen, and then you can take the built plate out. This whole assembly just feels unnecessarily large, but I guess that's just me. I'm not entirely certain why it has to be this big. Also, I'm hoping the camera will focus right. There's a little screw in here that is just screwed in from the top. And that is the way they have you make sure that you're inserting the built plate the correct way around. Because if that screw is facing the back, it just won't slide in there. Seems kind of weird. On the AccuFab L4K, they have a similar system to make sure that you slide it in the right way around. But, and once again, I'm hoping the camera will focus, you've got these grooves on the top of the built plate assembly, and they make sure that you can only insert it one way around. It feels like the better option to me. On top of that, a couple other differences in the built plates. The built plates themselves are fairly similar, also in size. Trying to make sure you can see this. So the AccuFab's is a tiny bit bigger, but as I said, the build volumes in the XY plane are identical, so that doesn't really matter. Both of them are kind of roughed up on the underneath surface, so prints should stay quite nicely. I like that. The Halot Sky's is actually sloped the entire way up to the center, whereas the AccuFab's isn't. It's only got these sloped edges. So the amount of resin that drains off of your built platform should actually be higher on the Halot Sky's. I prefer this setup a little bit. But on the AccuFab L4K, you've got these springs down here and then the calibration screws. So the calibration process is actually a little bit nicer on the AccuFab, thanks to that spring setup. In addition, these knobs that you use to tighten the built plates inside the machine. The Halot Sky's is a little banged up. It's already all scratched, and we just unpacked it. So I'm assuming they have a bin of, I don't know, 500 of these knobs at the factory, and they just take one and put it on the built plate. Doesn't look as nice, doesn't feel as nice. When things are already all scratched up and banged up when you get them, it's just not as nice an experience. With the AccuFab, you've got a little rubber grip, and the whole knob is really solid and looks nice and is well machined, also made of metal instead of plastic. So once again, it's just a nice little bonus on the AccuFab. It feels a little more valuable. But, you know, it's not a deal breaker. It's just a matter of it feels good. And feeling good is always nice when you get a new pricey machine. Next up, the whole Z-axis assembly. On both of them, as I mentioned, this is all metal, so the Z-axis can't really go anywhere. In addition to that, both of these setups have a Z-lead screw and then 2 linear guide rails. The AccuFab L4K uses Highwin brand guide rails for the Z-axis. On the Halot Sky, it seems to be a no-name brand, at least I don't see any visible branding, but they should still work just fine. So the Z-axis stability on both of these machines is really, really high and should work great. Then next we have the resin tanks themselves. So on the Creality Halot Sky, we've got 2 screws fixing the resin tank inside the printer, and you unscrew those, can take those out, put them aside, and then remove the resin tank. Resin tank itself has a little indication for how much resin you want to be inside the printer, so that's nice. It's got little feet underneath, so you can put it on the table without worrying about damaging your FEP film. That is nice. These same feet slot into grooves on the printer itself, so the positioning of the resin tank is fairly easy. So I like all of those things. On the AccuFab L4K, you don't have screws. You've got these little levers on the left and right, and then you can remove the resin tank. On this one as well, it's much heavier than the Crealities. I'm not entirely certain why, but the walls are thicker and maybe it's even a different material. It just feels a lot more weighty. Again, we have indicators for how much resin you want to be in the resin tank. And something I quite like about this one is it has a large spigot, which is super useful when trying to clean your resin tank and pouring out excess resin from your tank. The Crealities, the Halot Sky's resin tank, does not have this. Obviously, this resin tank as well has little feet, so you can just put it on the table without worrying about damaging or dirtying your FEP film. A quick word about this lever system. I love it. It's the quickest and easiest way I've seen to fix a resin tank inside of a machine. And you can't forget to fix the resin tank because the cover won't close while these levers are open. So you will always remember to do that. On the Halot Sky, theoretically, I could close this and start printing with my screws still next to the machine. If I ever do that, the resin tank will lift up off of the screen thanks to the insane amount of sticking power of the cured resin between the built plate and the resin tank. So it would lift up and I would most likely damage my printer. I've once done that on a different Creality printer, breaking the screen. Don't want that to happen. So I prefer this lever system just because it's more foolproof and a little easier to operate. Also, as I mentioned, before I screw this in again, I can show what Creality have done in terms of a spigot. There's a tiny little notch back here, but that doesn't do anything. It doesn't help you pour out the resin. So I prefer that aspect of the AccuFab, having that little assistance when trying to empty the resin tank. Both of the printers feature a filter on the inside, so the air from inside the closed build volume should be filtered before it goes to the outside world again, reducing the amount of fumes of resin you have. But even so, these printers should both be operated in well-ventilated areas. Last but not least, for this inside area, the AccuFab L4K has little LEDs on the inside. Not entirely sure for what. I guess if you set up a camera to watch the print overnight or want to do time lapses or something, it's a nice gimmick, but it's not necessary. But once again, it's a little something that just makes the printer feel valuable. So that's everything of the outside and the inside of the hoods. What's next? Next, let's go over the accessories that come with the printer, because why not? So with the Halot Sky, we get a resin tank cover for when it's not in use. We get a replacement FEP film in case you break it. And of course, we get a user manual, warranty card, and all that. The user manuals from Creality are often pretty good. This one is an exception in some ways because obviously the menu is outdated. That is printed in here. By now it looks different. But they have a complete circuit board of the inside assembly. So if you ever do decide to have to fix something, this might come in handy. They have a flow chart for troubleshooting on the inside, which I find quite nice, and a number of other things. So this is useful. You get a number of filters for leftover resin when pouring it back into a bottle. You get a plastic and a metal scraper. I'll come a little closer for these. I hate these plastic scrapers. Don't use them on your FEP film. You will sooner or later scratch it. Just don't use these. Buy yourself a silicone squeegee. They cost nothing on Amazon. And a metal scraper to get the prints off the built platform. Don't ever use this on your FEP film. That'll instantly break it. And we get a little paintbrush, I assume to clean the print bed of resin, but I never quite like these because, especially on the cheap ones, the brush hairs come out and then you've got these things inside of your resin tank. That's not where they're supposed to be. Of course, we also get some hex keys to do necessary maintenance. Right, before I forget, when this printer comes with a lid not attached to the printer, you actually need to use one of those hex keys to insert 4 screws on the back to install the lid. Little interesting to me, personally. On the side of the AccuFab L4K, you get a little quick start guide. You also get a resin tank cover to cover the resin tank when not in use. You get a 1 liter bottle of the standard yellow DM12 material included in the printer, so you'll immediately have some branded resin. And you get this little lunchbox of accessories. It always makes me feel like a school kid bringing my lunch. But it's actually really nice, and it's got this nice little packaging, and inside is everything you could possibly need. You've got disposable one-way gloves. Always wear gloves when handling resin, that's important. No gloves included here. You've got microfiber cloth in order to clean the screen, should that be necessary. You've got a silicone squeegee. This is what I mentioned. Don't use the rubber scrapers. You've got the USB cable, and you've got an Ethernet cable, so I really like that both of that's included. You also have a little plastic toothbrush. This is what's included in order to clean the built plate of surplus resin without losing any brush hairs inside. You have 2 different metal scrapers, one really solid one that I don't know what the hell they're trying to do with it, and one other one that will also be, well, used to get parts off the print bed. You get, of course, also a hex key with a number of screws for maintenance. You get a USB stick with the software and some sample parts. Same on the Halot Sky, by the way. You get a USB stick with software and sample parts. And then they even include these little PET film cards that I'm still not entirely sure what they're for. I'm pretty sure they're to scrape excess resin off of the built plate and into the resin tank, but yeah, I don't use these, but they're included, so I figured I would mention them. In addition, theoretically, if you just got the printer, after a print has finished, you need to wash and cure your finished part. If you wanted to, you could remove the styrofoam from inside this little lunchbox, fill it with alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and wash your parts inside this box. So if you don't have a better setup, this is nice in order to get you started. Long term though, you should probably invest in a washing and curing station. The one that Creality sells is actually really good in terms of both value and operation. So I like what Creality have done for that. But yeah, this lunchbox of accessories plus the resin give you everything you need to get started to just print with this printer. So I really, really like the amount of accessories we get with the AccuFab L4K, supremely superior to the Halot Sky. While these things are good enough to get you started, it is insufficient in terms of protection and just continued operation. No resin included, no gloves included, no squeegee, no microfiber cloth, all these little things that you will need when starting to actually print. Right, so now we've covered the accessories and the outside of the printers. Now it is time to look at the menus. Both of these screens are 5 inches in across diagonal. The screen diagonal is 5 inches for both of them. And the Creality, interestingly enough, is a portrait mode screen. On the AccuFab L4K, it is landscape, so horizontal. Both of these screens feature a number of different languages. Among them are German, English, and Chinese. The Halot Sky also has a number of other translations available as well. Due to the large size of the screen and the fairly powerful processors in each of these, you actually have a lot of menus and options that you can select. One of the things I want to mention is both of these printers are Wi-Fi enabled and should be able to update themselves over the air. That's literally one of the main selling points for each of these that you find online. However, when unpacking the Creality, the firmware that was installed was so old that I actually had to go online, download a firmware onto a USB stick and update it from that USB stick before being able to use that Wi-Fi connectivity in order to update the firmware. So I'm not sure if I just got an old machine that still had really old firmware or whether this is a common problem, but when Wi-Fi connectivity and over-the-air firmware updates are your main selling point, I shouldn't have to go online to download a firmware update onto a USB stick. It just feels bad. Makes me instantly feel like that part of my purchase was not worth it. On the AccuFab, no problem on that front, but I have to mention, after updating the firmware, the Wi-Fi connectivity now works great. And now I can also get these over-the-air firmware updates. Just took an extra step. Don't know why. But for full disclosure, now it works great. Personally, I prefer the Shining 3D menu. It just gives you a lot more information and it just has a cleaner feel to it. It tells me the air temperature and humidity inside my build volume. It gives me a warning if if it is too cold inside. You want to print resin anywhere between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius usually. The screen gives me a little diagram of my printer, whether it's currently working. It has a status symbol. It tells me what material I claim to have loaded. I can change that. If I do change the material, it's an added safety measure. Make sure that you really have the material inside the machine that you meant to have in there. It tells me how many layers this resin tank is already printed. And then I have a menu selection with a little preview image of my part. And of course, in the settings, I can raise or lower the Z-axis. I can calibrate my printer. I can turn on the screen. I can make it project custom images, whatever I want. It has an additional accuracy calibration in order to make sure that the accuracy is as high as in any way possible with this printer. So the menu and the options that are inside are really, really good on the AccuFab L4K. In addition, it also has a door sensor, so as soon as I open the door, a little icon will appear on the screen telling me that the door is open, and I have the option in one of the submenus to pause the print when this happens. This may be important for some ISO certified companies. On the Halot Sky, the menu is a lot more bare bones. I don't have one of those door sensors, and basically I just have two buttons. I can print or I can go to settings. Let's start with the settings. They work great. However, for the Z-axis, I only have raise it all the way up or calibrate it, aka go all the way down where you don't want to have a resin tank in between. There's no slow stepping the Z-axis. It's either all the way up or all the way down. For cleaning the resin vat, I can turn on the screen and leave it on until I push it again, but it will only illuminate the entire screen, not only individual areas, as on the AccuFab L4K. As I said, I also now have Wi-Fi connectivity and I can update it over the air. There's not much else in the menu of the Halot Sky. Aside from the language selection, I already mentioned that. However, there's one really interesting thing with the Halot Sky, and that ties into the next part, the slicing software. For the Halot Sky, there is a closed ecosystem in terms of slicing software. They developed a slicing software specifically for this, and you cannot use Chitubox or Litchi or any of these other ones. And inside that slicing software, you don't set the print parameters. Instead, you do that on the printer itself via this display. When you select your file to print, you then have to go to settings and adjust your Z-lift speed and your exposure time and your exposure delay and all of these things inside this tiny screen. And I don't know entirely why I can't do that in the slicing software already and have to do it here. It also lends itself to difficulties in a factory setting where the printer operator doesn't necessarily know all the fine-tuned settings for each resin. Their only job is take part out of printer, put build plate back in printer, start next print. That kind of setup does not work here because you need to adjust the settings on the screen of the printer itself. On the AccuFab, once the file is sliced from the software, you can just start it. It is interesting because it lets you adjust already sliced parts on the fly without having to reslice them or go back to your computer. But honestly, once you've figured out your settings, you shouldn't need to go back and forth between your workstation and the printer that much anyway. So I'm really struggling with this feature, whether I hate it or I find it okay. But in my opinion, it's the nicer solution to just include all the print settings in the slicing software. Now, slicing softwares themselves, they are a different topic. And both of these printers are closed ecosystems. I mentioned that for the Halot Sky, but the same is true for the AccuFab. Well, in a way, they only allow one slicer. They both allow you to use any resin that you want. You can use any third-party resin that you may have lying around or that you want to buy. You can use whatever the hell you want, but you have to use their slicers. And that's where it gets difficult, because in my opinion, the Creality Slicer is not ready for market. It feels like the beta version that it says in the installing file that it is. It feels unfinished. Menus feel unfinished. I've had multiple software crashes when trying to import slightly more complex models. The support generation is a little insufficient in my opinion. You can only click on generate supports or not, and you have very few settings that let you change these supports. You cannot do something like touch platform only. Either you have supports everywhere or not. Manually removing them seems a little bit needlessly difficult, but it does work. Now on the other side, the Shining 3D software is great. It feels intuitive, it feels clean, it's very easy to understand and use, and as long as you use their branded resin, all these settings are already predetermined and input in the file. So if you don't know anything about resin printing and you're just getting started with it and you just want it to work, get the Shining resin. You get a bottle anyway, start up the slicer, put your model in there, click slice, and then print, and it will print and it will work. You don't have to worry about print fails or anything like that, because all these settings are pre-validated for that resin and this printer. On the Halot Sky, it is a completely open system. It does not come with a branded resin, and you first have to figure out what settings you want to use with whatever resin you want to put into this printer. So I much prefer the Shining 3D option, where you have a number of branded resins with predetermined settings, over the variant of the Creality Halot Sky, where the software feels unfinished, and then I have zero guidance on what kind of settings to use. Because generally, the resin manufacturers don't give you any settings because they don't know what printer you're using, and the settings can vary wildly between them. But in addition, Creality have not gone and tested some of the most common resins and given you recommendations for those. No, you're just left on your own and you have to figure it out. If you're new to resin printing, that can be really daunting and difficult, especially if then your first couple of prints fail. That just feels really bad. So I prefer the solution from Shining 3D. Aside from the slicing software being better, I just love that there are some settings that you get delivered with the printer. We'll be printing with both, and then we can have a look at what the differences in print results are. After all, this was all just outside stuff. Let's see what they actually deliver. That's the most interesting part. All right, so both of our prints are finished, and we can now take them out of the machines. So I'm gonna take the built plate out of the Creality Halot, put it right here. I recommend having something like the silicone mat, so any drips that you make don't go onto your table, make everything dirty. Now I'll take the one out of the AccuFab. And voila. So, got both of these. Look good. We already had the photos earlier, so now I'm gonna try and get them off the platform with this spatula. And I'm gonna start with the AccuFab. And what's nice is their rafts have a little like edge that you can get underneath. And that should make this very easy. Once I get in there, there we go. The whole part just comes right off. And I'm expecting this part to be significantly more difficult on the Halot. There we go. That is number 2. And that is number 3, which comes right off. Right, so now the Halot Sky. Gonna clean my spatula so I don't contaminate my resin. There we go. So for this, you really need a sharp-edged spatula because the rafts don't actually have any beveled edge around the corners, so it's not raised any. So you really need a sharp spatula to be able to get underneath there. So I need a little more space here. Cramp myself a bit because I wanted everything in one shot. Let's see whether that works as easy for the next one. There we go. And the last one. Curses. So on the last one, I broke my raft, essentially. Let me put the spatula aside. So I broke the raft right here. But that shouldn't matter, as it's all support structures that I'm going to remove anyway. So next up is the washing and curing process. I'm going to put all these into our washing station, and then we can remove the support structures afterwards. All right, so right here, I've got a vat full of isopropyl alcohol, 99% pure, so it's really highly concentrated, and it's the best for washing this type of resin. So I'm just going to put these in there. And then we have a washing station that uses a little fan or propeller at the bottom to agitate the water, and that should help really get rid of all the excess resin that is still on these parts. All right, so the first batch is done. Time for the next one to go in. Okay, we're back. Both of these things have been washed of excess resin and then cured in our washing and curing station, and honestly, they both look quite nice. However, when you look closely, the AccuFabs just does look a little nicer. There's some ghosting, you can see and feel the layers, there's some, I don't know, artifacts and stuff on this model. I'll have some pictures later on, but for now, what I want to know is how easy we can get the support structures off. And I'm going to start once again with the AccuFab L4K's model, and then move on to the Creality Halot Sky. So to begin with the AccuFab, we're just going to try and get the supports off by hand without any cutting knife or hobby knife or anything. I'm just going to try and see how easily they come off. Stuck a bit in there. But overall, they came away so easily at the top. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so I do have a few little bits still stuck to my part, like up here. I'm just going to take those away. But overall, I could mostly just pull on it and it came right off. And the surfaces actually do feel pretty okay. They're a little bit rough, but overall, No big issue removing the support structures. So that was the AccuFab L4K. And now let's try the Creality Halot Sky. I wonder whether the same deal works. Up there it does. There it does. So I can get rid of that. On the inside. And this is a little more stiff, but I can just break them off. Have I damaged my part? Not yet, at least not significantly, but due to the nature of where the supports were attached, I do have significantly more, well, not exactly major damage to my part, but leftovers. Like down here, I just have little bits that stick out on the corner, so it doesn't feel nice, it doesn't feel flat or even. The leftovers are significantly more rough than on the AccuFab, and I have a problem. Because in the slicing software, I wasn't able to tell the printer to do touch platform only. I've got tiny little supports. I'm not sure whether that is visible on the camera because it just refuses to focus on this. There are tiny little supports inside all of these holes that are annoying to get out of there. There's even some in here, in between this little crossbar and the upper part. I'm not sure why those are there. And I can get these away, but it's not that great of an experience, and I'm gonna have to get, like, I don't know, a screwdriver or something to push through these holes and get the supports out of there. So overall, support removal, much easier on the AccuFab L4K's model, but at least I was able to just pry them off. I didn't need a hobby knife or anything like that. We could see in the time-lapse that the Halot Sky printer was quite a bit faster than the AccuFab. The speed difference was about 20% of the print time, which is fairly significant. It seems to be due to the way that the Z-lift is being handled. The Halot Sky has just one motor speed, and it will use that to raise and lower the build platform. The AccuFab has different speeds when it is close to the FEP film or farther away, and it even differentiates between the early, the middle, and the late layers of a part. In the end, it seems to be a trade-off between speed and quality, as so often. Both of these are great printers, but for kind of different target audiences. The Creality Halot Sky CL89 delivers decent prints at a reasonable speed and very reasonable price. However, the slicing software is severely lacking, and the app used to control it is not suited for company use. It looks more like something targeted at hobbyists. The parts have a staircase effect showing the layers, they have some defects, and support removal leaves some very visible scarring that will need post-processing. If the slicing is opened up, so Lychee and Chitubox can be used with this, or they put some significant work into their own slicer, this could become a really good choice for hobbyists, miniature makers, or other creative minds that have a little bit of money to spend and are looking for a large format resin printer that can be treated like a workhorse occasionally. However, some previous knowledge of resin printing is highly recommended here, if only to deal with this whole resin setting on the screen thing. This printer does have a number of things going for it though. With a lid that I can just lift up like this, the very solid assembly out of metal, the big screen with Wi-Fi connectivity, this whole thing is a decent good deal for its price. Now the shining 3D AccuFab L4K yields exceptional prints, but takes a bit longer to do this. The slicing software is designed with multiple printers in a print farm in mind and seems targeted at small batch production in a company setting. The layers on this part are all but invisible, the surfaces are completely smooth and even, and the support removal leaves minimal scarring. This machine right here is the better choice for people that want a very low barrier of entry to resin printing, know little about resin printing and don't want to spend a lot of time learning, or just want a plug-and-play ecosystem when using the branded resin while maintaining the option to use third-party resins in the workflow. The prices differ significantly between these two machines, with the Halot Sky costing 950 euros retail and the AccuFab costing just under 3,000. With the AccuFab, you pay for the knowledge about resin settings you don't need to have, the quality of life details like this lever system for the resin tank, the grooves on the built platform or the LEDs in the top, and of course the superior quality of the print results. In the end, it is up to you what you value more. As I said before, in my opinion, the Halot Sky is great for hobbyists or small manufacturers, but when looking at a company setting or even a real factory, the AccuFab seems like the better choice. What do you think about this? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. Please also let me know if I missed an important feature or fact about either of these printers. Do you maybe own one of them? If so, please tell me about your experiences with them. I'm very curious because, well, my experience is still very limited. Consider subscribing to the channel to get notified whenever we upload a new video. In any case, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.